When Samantha Clark became pregnant with her second child, everything went as expected. But as she went into labor, the woman needed to be taken to the operating room for doctors to try to save her and the baby. When there was no more hope, her husband did something unbelievable. Craig and Samantha couldn't contain their happiness when they found out they were going to have a second baby. They had been trying to conceive for at least a year and have a brother or sister with the child they already had. The boy himself, John, asked the couple for a little brother. When they did the ultrasound that it was possible to identify the child's sex, Samantha asked the doctor not to tell them anything. The professional then wrote down the result on a piece of paper and handed it to a friend of Samantha's, who was in charge of organizing a small celebration between friends and family. The revelation was made between sweets and a cake. When purple and pink balloons floated up and stuck to the apartment ceiling, indicating it was going to be a girl, everyone was thrilled, but no one cried like Craig. He hugged his wife and son, and kissed them both with the realization of that dream. It was touching to see how excited the father was for his daughter to come, and like a Red Sox fan, he shouted, "I'm going to teach her to play baseball too," drawing laughter from everyone there. Craig met Samantha in college. He managed to get into a good university in the Boston area thanks to his talents as a hitter. He had been regional champion at age 16 in the student league, and at 17 he caught the attention of recruiters for the huge amount of points he scored during that year's championship. He ended up not becoming a professional player due to a shoulder injury, but all his undergraduate years he played for the university. He always said that his best performance in the sport had been during a training session on campus. After hitting a ball and sending it to the sky, Craig ended up spotting Samantha, a very beautiful girl he had never seen around there. She was accompanied by a friend. "That was the best hit of my life, because it brought me you," Craig said to Samantha in her wedding vows in front of all the guests. The ceremony was simple and elegant, 1 year after Samantha's graduation. As an engineer, Craig switched from the baton to the calculator, but continued to follow the sport closely. When John was born, it was the greatest joy of his life, and at the age of 3 the boy was already hitting a ball with his father. Craig and Samantha had no expectation that their son would become an athlete like his father had been, but they had fun tossing balls across the yard and taking the boy to Red Sox games. Now that they were expecting a daughter, Craig and John used to lie in bed with Samantha and listen to the girl kick and move. Everything seemed perfect, but the family would suffer with a radical change of destiny. As the pregnancy approached 40 weeks, Craig and Samantha reinforced their purchases to receive her with all comfort. Crib, clothes of all colors, toys and lots of diapers filled the room decorated especially for the baby. The day of delivery was scheduled for 10 days from now. As Samantha had already gone through this process before, she was calm, because she thought she knew how everything was going to happen. However, in the penultimate week, something unexpected happened. Samantha woke up and began to feel a slight contraction. As it didn't seem like anything too serious, she and her husband went to the hospital without much worry. They just wanted to make sure everything was okay. During the consultation with the doctor, the contractions suddenly increased and the water broke. That's when everything took a turn for the worse. Samantha felt very strong dizziness and nausea. Since the contractions had interrupted her breakfast, she felt weak too. She hadn't been through any of this when she first gave birth, but she still thought it might not be a big deal. Who knows, it was just his daughter announcing her arrival earlier than expected. But Samantha was wrong. Minutes later, she passed out right in front of the doctor. Craig was pretty scared. He'd never seen his wife in that state, and not all the hitter's concentration had prepared him for a situation like this. "What is happening? What does she have?" he asked in vain, to a team that was agitated by this unforeseen event. The woman's heart rate slowed and her blood pressure dropped to 0. As time passed, as the doctor and nurses tried to understand what was happening, Samantha turned blue and appeared to be having trouble breathing. Soon, her body was placed on top of a bed connected to various devices that measured her conditions and also the little baby she was carrying in her womb. The problem is that the baby's vital signs have also started to drop. Craig felt a macabre chill down his spine. He could only watch in amazement at it all without being able to do anything. The medical staff knew they needed to act quickly and carried out some additional tests. That's how they finally confirmed that Samantha was suffering from an amniotic fluid embolism, a rare allergic reaction that happens when amniotic fluid enters the mother's bloodstream. This causes the heart and lungs to stop working. The woman was immediately taken to another ward of the maternity unit, towards the operating room. But there, the nurses wouldn't let Craig in either. He protested, said he wanted to be close to his wife and daughter at that moment, but the nurses insisted that the situation was too delicate and the doctors needed concentration, as there was a possibility that she would not survive. And if he survived, Samantha would never be the same person again. Hearing that, Craig felt as if the world was on his shoulders. Alone in the maternity ward, he wanted to punch the walls until his fists bled. But instead, he crouched down and leaned his head against the wall. With all the strength he had, he began to speak softly to himself. Whoever saw the scene didn't know if he was praying or just hoping that everything would work out. But it was certainly a harrowing scene. Craig really needed to be strong, as he would soon have one of the most painful defeats of his life. In the operating room, Samantha's condition became even more complicated and no measure used by the healthcare team was able to prevent the worst. At 10:20 minutes that morning, Samantha was declared dead. Even though it was a completely horrible situation for everyone there was no time to grieve. The team still wanted to save the baby. Meanwhile, Craig was outside, pacing back and forth. This was too much for him. The two had spent the last few months preparing for the baby's arrival, planning what their family's life would be like, and dreaming of their baby's face. They hadn't even chosen a name yet. They wanted to look at their daughter and only then name it. And now he was here alone, having to say goodbye to the woman he'd met by chance 10 years ago, thanks to a baseball game. Craig felt helpless and scared. He had never been through this and he was in shock. Even so, he tried to keep his head on straight. His daughter was still struggling and he wouldn't give up as long as there was a 1% chance of reversing the whole situation. He couldn't let his wife go without a fight. Craig then faced the challenge the only way he could. He got down on one knee and made the most heartbreaking and honest request of his life. I know this is more than I can take, and maybe it's more than I can ask for. Maybe that means there's a plan for me and a purpose to it all. That's what I'm going to trust. Just let me hug my wife one more time, that's all I ask, Craig said on the floor of that hallway. He was a desperate man. He then got up and called his family and friends, asked them all to come to the maternity ward without delay. When everyone was already in the waiting room, they held hands and reinforced the requests and prayers for Samantha and the baby. The pleas even ended up on the social networks of those people, and soon even people who didn't know Samantha or Craig were expressing support for the family, hoping that everything would go well. After prayers, everyone chose a corner to wait for better news. Samantha was still in the operating room and the doctors were struggling to revive her, a last desperate attempt. Fortunately, the team taking care of the child managed to save the girl. She was born crying weakly, but the important thing is that she was taken from her mother and would live. Despite this victory, it was still unclear whether the newborn could be comforted by her own mother on her first day of life in this world. Craig was crying and laughing at the same time as he held his daughter in his arms. The feeling was indescribable for better or worse. He had heard of experiences of this kind, capable of confusing our logic and scrambling our senses, but only now did he understand what it really meant and how difficult it was to explain. In those few minutes when he could look at the girl, he had no doubts what name to give her. Grace, that's what it would be called. Craig was happy to have his little Grace, but the fear of simultaneously losing his wife was like a shadow that threatened to ruin all contentment. Like, subscribe, and share this content with some friend. Help us to spread free valuable knowledge. Fate then decided to bet on the ex-athlete's hope, and soon the doctor appeared to give the news. Samantha had reacted to the last resuscitation attempt. His pulse was still weak, but he was breathing again. The doctor said that no one knew how it had happened, but the fact is that now they would do everything to stabilize the woman. Craig hugged family and friends around him. Hearing those words was like a ton of anguish had been lifted off her shoulders. Doctors transferred Samantha to the ICU, where they did everything possible to keep her breathing. However, she began to experience a decline in vital signs again. Samantha's brother, who was a surgeon, arrived at the hospital and asked to see her records. He knew that this was no good and that the risks were extreme. His sister was in a state of cardiovascular collapse. He himself went to the waiting room and explained to everyone what was happening. It was a very sad and scary time. Craig then got up, looked at his newborn daughter, and decided to enter his wife's room in the ICU. As doctors and nurses checked medical records, monitored the situation via on-screen graphics, and administered medication, the engineer approached Samantha and took her hand. "I love you and I always will. Graca is already with me and she is beautiful and perfect. If you still have any strength left to fight, please fight." Craig's faith in his wife's change was strong, but Samantha's condition did not change. Even after 2 blood transfusions, the condition was still considered critical. The heart was failing, pumping less and less blood through the body. Her lungs stopped working, she was breathing through machines. Samantha was unconscious and freezing. At any moment she could take her last breath, but one of the doctors noticed something that was going unnoticed. Reevaluating one of the exams and looking at the patient's situation, he noticed that one of the organs had been cut by mistake and was still bleeding, without them having tried to do it. Then, close to being presumed dead a second time, she was taken to the operating room again, but in another hospital. It was a complex better equipped for that situation and had a machine that would assist in extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, restoring the functions of the heart and lungs. They also lowered the level of sedation to the point where Samantha regained consciousness so they could assess the patient's neurological functions. When he saw the woman showing signs of life again, Craig came back into the room and was right in his sight. He took her hand in his and said, "Hi, my love," with a hopeful smile. Although confused and downcast, Samantha smiled back and let a tear flow. The doctors hadn't expected a reaction like that after everything he'd been through. Not only had her brain not died, her neurological functions were better preserved than normal. It was at that moment that Craig realized there was a way to save Samantha for real. The doctors then warned her that they would try another surgery and that she would pass out under anesthesia soon. With agility, Craig rushed Grace and placed the newborn in Samantha's lap, making mother and daughter touch each other for the first time. "Her name is Grace, my love. Our daughter is here, alive. We'll be here when you wake up," Craig said, choked with emotion. Samantha was very weak, but the expression on her face and in her eyes completely changed. Seeing and feeling her daughter seemed to awaken something inside the woman and regain her strength. Samantha was willing to keep fighting for her life. But as soon as the anesthesiologist applied the substance, Samantha was unconscious again. All that was left for Craig to do was take care of Graca and wait. John was at his grandparents' house and had no idea how much danger his mother was in. The entire episode was the toughest test of faith and resilience that Craig and several of his friends and family have ever passed. But eventually the surgery ended and Samantha's condition was miraculously stabilized. By then, the doctors were exhausted and confused. How did a woman's body manage to face death and the birth of a life at the same time? Craig wept with relief. On the phone, he almost couldn't break the good news to his parents because he was still shaking. Now they could come to the maternity ward to meet Graca and bring her brother along. 24 hours later, the fan was removed and Samantha breathed on her own again. It wasn't until a few hours later that Craig, John, and little Grace were able to speak to her. The woman was exhausted, but she didn't remember much. Even without strength and with a heavy head, she wanted to hold her daughter in her arms once more. Craig helped her, setting the child down on her lap. When Graca opened her eyes and her eyes met her mother's for the first time, a tear slipped into Samantha's eyes, pushing away all the anguish that surrounded the place minutes before. Craig sat next to his wife and thanked the sky quietly. Did you like this story? Check out many other real and exciting stories on our channel. See you later.